There are some wounds that don't bleed. They don't leave a visible scar for the world to see and politely ask about. Instead, they just echo. They live in the quiet moments in the space between heartbeats in the dead of night when the only thing you can hear is the sound of your own breathing. For Clara Vance, that echo was the soundtrack of her life. Her small cabin was nestled deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, a place where the morning mist clings to the valleys like a well-kept secret. To any passerby on the distant highway, it looked like an idyllic escape, a perfect picture of solitude. But for Clara, it wasn't solitude. It was quarantine. She had come here to silence the world, hoping it might silence the noise inside her own head. See, when most people think of a veteran's trauma, they picture the flash of gunfire, the chaos of a battlefield. It's a common misconception to think all wounds have to be loud. Clara's war wasn't fought in the sand and the heat. It was fought from a sterile, air-conditioned room thousands of miles away. She was a former Air Force drone pilot. Her battlefield was a bank of glowing screens, her weapon a joystick, her reality a God's-eye view of a world she would never touch. She never felt the ground shake. She never smelled the smoke. But the ghosts were as real as the coffee she brewed every morning. They weren't loud either. They were quiet, pixelated figures on a screen one moment and gone the next, all with the clinical click of a button. And then came the silence, the deafening, soul-crushing silence that followed a successful mission. That was her echo. The psychological toll of playing God from a distance had a name she learned later: moral injury. It was the slow erosion of the soul, a wound so deep no stitches could close it. Her days bled into one another in a haze of insomnia and hypervigilance. A car backfiring on the main road would send a jolt of ice through her veins. A knock at the door was a threat, not a welcome. She was a prisoner in paradise, and the warden was her own mind. That's how things were until the storm came. It wasn't a gentle rain. It was a furious, violent squall that seemed to want to tear the mountains from their roots. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and rain hammered against her windows. In the middle of it all, through the flashes of lightning, she saw something. A flicker of movement near the edge of her property, right by the tangled barbed wire fence of the old decommissioned military communications outpost that bordered her land. Her training, the part of her that was still a soldier, took over. She grabbed a heavy flashlight and a rain slicker and stepped out into the chaos. And there he was. A golden-haired Labrador, drenched and shivering, not cowering or whining, but just watching her. He was impossibly still, his eyes fixed on hers with an unnerving, quiet intelligence. There was no collar, no tags, just a deep exhaustion in his gaze that she recognized instantly. It was the same look she saw in her own mirror every morning. She coaxed him inside. He moved with a strange, deliberate grace, as if every step was calculated. He didn't bark, not once. He just sat on the rug by the fireplace, the water pooling around him, and continued to watch her. The next day, she took him to the local vet, an old-timer named Doc Miller. He confirmed the dog was underweight but otherwise healthy. But then he found something else. "Well, that's odd," Doc Miller mumbled gently, folding back the dog's ear. "Take a look." There on the delicate skin inside his ear was a faded tattoo. It wasn't a name or a symbol. It was a cold alphanumeric serial number, S27. "Looks military," the vet said, cleaning his glasses. "But not like any service tag I've ever seen. This is something else entirely." Clara took him home, a new layer of mystery now wrapped around her silent companion. She decided to call him Echo. It just felt right. The first few days established a new routine, a silent, shared existence. Echo never made a sound. He simply followed her, a golden shadow in her quiet life. But it was the nights that changed everything. The night terrors always came for Clara around 3 a.m. The cold sweat, the racing heart, the silent scream trapped in her throat as the images from the screens replayed in her mind. But on the third night, something different happened. Just before the familiar dread could take hold, she was nudged awake, a cold, wet nose on her cheek. Echo was standing beside her bed, his head cocked, his amber eyes glowing in the moonlight. He hadn't waited for her to scream. He had woken her up before the nightmare began. As a wave of anxiety washed over her, he did something even stranger. He hopped onto the bed and laid his full body across her chest, his head resting over her heart. It wasn't the needy gesture of a pet seeking comfort. It was a deliberate, steady pressure. Grounding. A word surfaced from the fog of her memory, a term from a long-forgotten psych evaluation, deep pressure therapy. A technique used to calm the nervous system. And this dog, this stray, was performing it instinctively. Night after night, the ritual repeated. He became her early warning system, her living anchor in the stormy sea of her subconscious. He didn't lick her face or offer playful distractions. He met her trauma with a profound, solemn stillness that was more comforting than any words could ever be. Clara started to realize she hadn't just found a stray. He had found her. They were two broken pieces of a forgotten war, speaking a language no one else could understand. A dialect of shared damage and quiet survival. True connection, she was learning, doesn't require words. It's found in the quiet spaces. Their journey into the lion's den had just begun, and as they walked home, the quiet mountain air no longer felt like a retreat. It felt like a training ground. The next few weeks were a blur of intense focus. Clara, channeling the discipline she thought she'd left behind in the Air Force, began training Echo. But it was unlike any training she'd ever known. There were no harsh commands, no repetitive drills. It was a conversation, a dance of intuition. She would think of a sequence over the log, through the tunnel, retrieve the flag, and Echo would often begin it before she even gave a hand signal. It was as if he was reading her intentions directly from her mind. But as their bond deepened, the anomalies grew more pronounced. One evening, as a storm rolled in, the power flickered and the old radio on her shelf crackled to life, emitting a burst of static. Echo, who had been dozing, shot up, his body rigid, his head cocked towards the radio, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. He seemed to be tracking the frequency, not the sound. It was another piece of a puzzle that made no sense. The real clue, the one that would unravel everything, arrived on a quiet Tuesday night. It came without a sound, a digital ghost slipping through the ether. An email. It was in her junk folder from an encrypted, untraceable address. There was no body, no text, just a two-word subject line that made the blood run cold in her veins. Nightingale S27. S27. The number tattooed inside Echo's ear. Clara stared at the screen, the quiet hum of her laptop suddenly feeling like a roar. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a message, a warning. Someone knew who Echo was, and they knew where to find him. The quarantine she had built for herself had been breached. Panic gave way to a cold, hard resolve. She couldn't run, not this time. She needed answers, and she knew she couldn't find them alone. There was a name she'd heard whispered in town, a local cautionary tale, Ben Carter. He was a once promising investigative journalist for a major D.C. paper, brought down by a story that turned out to be based on a fabricated source. Now he ran a local podcast out of his basement, chasing small-town corruption and nursing a wounded reputation. He was disgraced, but he was also brilliant, and more importantly, he was hungry for a story that could put him back on the map. She found him in a dusty office above the town's only bookstore. He listened to her story, his expression a mixture of pity and skepticism. A traumatized veteran, a smart dog, a cryptic email. It sounded like the stuff of late-night conspiracy radio. "Look, Ms. Vance," he said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "I get it. You've been through a lot. But look at this," Clara interrupted, sliding a photo across the desk. It was a close-up of the tattoo in Echo's ear. "And this." She showed him the email on her phone. Ben leaned forward, his journalistic instincts kicking in despite himself. The precision of the tattoo, the sterile nature of the email, this was something more than a stray dog story. "Nightingale," he murmured, typing the word into his computer. "Probably a dead end. A code name. Could be anything." For days they hit nothing but brick walls. But Ben was relentless. He dug through archives, military forums, and declassified document dumps, chasing the ghost of a word. Finally, late one night, he found it. A single redacted reference in a budget report for DARPA, the government's high-tech research agency. Project Nightingale. The project's description was blacked out, but its objective category was listed as Bioacoustic Empathic Interface. It had been officially terminated 3 years ago. All assets listed as decommissioned. Decommissioned, Clara whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. That's a sterile way of saying they were destroyed. The breakthrough came from a source Ben had cultivated from his old DC days. A source who pointed them to one man, a former bioethicist from the project now living in self-imposed exile, consumed by guilt. After a series of cautious coded calls, he agreed to talk. They met in a dimly lit diner 100 miles away. The scientist, a man named Dr. Alistair Finch, was a ghost himself, with haunted eyes and hands that trembled as he clutched his coffee cup. "You don't know what you found," he began, his voice barely a whisper. Project Nightingale wasn't about creating a better soldier. It was about trying to heal them. He explained everything. Nightingale wasn't a program for attack dogs. It was a top-secret, ethically ambiguous experiment to create the ultimate therapy animal. They didn't just train the dogs, they engineered them. Using a combination of advanced biofeedback monitoring and neural conditioning, they taught the dogs to recognize a soldier's stress responses, heart rate, cortisol levels, brainwave patterns, and actively intervene. The name Nightingale was a reference to Florence Nightingale, the nurse. These dogs were meant to be battlefield medics for the soul. "And S-27?" Clara asked, her heart pounding. "Subject 27, Dr. Finch confirmed. He was our prodigy, the most sensitive, the most intuitive of them all. We called him Echo because he didn't just mirror our emotions, he absorbed them." Here came the twist, the dark secret that had been buried. The project was shut down because it was too effective. The dogs became so psychically linked to the soldiers' trauma, Finch explained, his voice cracking, that they began to suffer themselves. Severe anxiety, depression. They were shouldering a burden they were never meant to carry. Their empathy was so profound it was breaking them. An oversight committee deemed them failed assets, unstable. They ordered the program terminated, and all the subjects euthanized. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. Echo wasn't just a stray, he was a survivor, a fugitive, one of the few who had somehow escaped his own execution. His gift, she said, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. His ability to feel what I'm feeling. It's also his greatest vulnerability. "Yes," Finch said, finally meeting her eyes. "He didn't just find a random veteran in the woods, Ms. Vance. He found the loudest echo of his own pain. He wasn't just comforting you. He was seeking someone who understood what it felt like to be a tool of war, burdened with a purpose that was slowly destroying you." The deepest compassion, Clara realized, often comes from the deepest suffering. What the world had deemed a failure was the most profound success she had ever witnessed. She looked at Ben, who was sitting in stunned silence, his recorder still running. They had the truth, a truth that was bigger than any competition, bigger than Marcus Thorne and his arrogant philosophy. But it was also a truth that put Echo in incredible danger. The people who created him had wanted him dead. The cryptic email wasn't a warning, it was a threat. Someone knew he was alive. And the Appalachian Canine Trials, the very event she had been pushed into, was no longer a small-town showdown. It was a public stage, and she was about to step into the spotlight with a priceless government-engineered secret by her side. The day of the Appalachian Canine Trials arrived under a sky of brilliant, unforgiving blue. The air buzzed with energy, a mixture of cheap hot dogs, expensive perfume, and palpable tension. To Clara, it felt less like a competition and more like stepping onto a battlefield she had never trained for. The stands were packed. Marcus Thorne was in his element, holding court with local news reporters, his champion German Shepherd looking more like a luxury car than a living animal at his side. He gave Clara a nod as she passed, a gesture dripping with condescending pity. When their turn came, a hush fell over the stadium. Clara and Echo walked onto the meticulously manicured field. For a moment, it was just them, a silent island in a sea of noise. Clara knelt down, looked into Echo's amber eyes, and felt a profound sense of calm. This wasn't for the crowd. It wasn't for Thorn. It was for them. A final validation of their silent language. She gave the first signal. Echo moved with a fluid, effortless grace that silenced the skeptics. He cleared the hurdles, navigated the weave poles, and executed the scent work with a focus that was almost hypnotic. He wasn't just obedient. He was anticipating, responding to her slightest gesture, her faintest shift in weight. They were a single cohesive unit. A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't the performance of a charity case. This was artistry. Clara could feel Thorn's gaze burning into her from the sidelines. He was no longer smiling. His perfectly constructed narrative was crumbling before his eyes. And he was not a man who tolerated failure. It happened during the final, most complex part of the course, the long-distance command sequence. As Echo raced towards the final tunnel, he suddenly faltered. He stopped, shaking his head as if to dislodge a persistent fly. He looked back at Clara, his eyes wide with a confusion she had never seen before. She gave the command again, her voice clear and steady, but Echo just whined a low, painful sound that was drowned out by the crowd's disappointed groan. He looked disoriented, distressed, his body trembling. Thorn was now smirking, a look of smug triumph on his face. In his hand, barely visible, he held a small black device no bigger than a garage door opener. From it, an ultrasonic frequency, inaudible to human ears but agonizing for a creature as sensitive as Echo, was flooding the field. It was a weapon designed not just to distract but to cause psychic pain, a tool straight from the darkest corners of the Nightingale Labs. The judges were looking at their watches, ready to sound the buzzer and disqualify them. Clara's heart shattered. It wasn't the loss that hurt. It was seeing Echo in such pain and being powerless to stop it. It was over. Thorn had won. But then something else cut through the noise, a sound that had nothing to do with the competition. It was the sharp, panicked cry of a child from the stands. A young boy no older than 7 was completely overwhelmed by the noise and the pressure, his face buried in his mother's shoulder as a full-blown panic attack took hold. And in that instant, every bit of Thorn's sonic interference, every command from Clara, every expectation from the crowd simply ceased to exist for Echo. A deeper programming took over, a purpose that superseded all others. Ignoring his own distress, he broke from the course. A gasp went through the stadium. He wasn't running away, he was running towards the sound of suffering. He moved with a singular, unwavering focus, weaving through officials and equipment. He reached the stands, found the boy, and did the one thing he was truly made to do. He gently nudged his head under the boy's arm and then laid his body across the crying child's lap, applying the steady, grounding weight of deep-pressure therapy. The entire stadium fell silent. The raw, uncommanded display of empathy was so profound, so unexpected, that it held thousands of people in a state of collective awe. The boy's frantic sobs slowly subsided into quiet, ragged breaths as he wrapped his small arms around Echo's neck. This was his true trial. This was his victory. At that exact moment, a commotion started at the main gate. Ben Carter pushed his way through security, his face grim. Beside him was the haunted, trembling figure of Dr. Alastair Finch. They had arrived. Ben pointed towards the field, towards Marcus Thorn. "That man," he yelled, his voice amplified by a stolen security bullhorn, "is using a restricted piece of government technology, a sonic disruptor from a defunct DARPA program." Dr. Finch stepped forward, his voice shaky but clear. "That program was called Project Nightingale," he said, his words echoing across the silent stadium. "And that dog is not a competitor. He is a healer, and Mr. Thorn knows it." Every eye turned to Thorn. The device was still in his hand. The truth of the moment was undeniable, witnessed by thousands. He hadn't just been cheating in a competition. He had been torturing a survivor. The crowd's stunned silence erupted into a roar of outrage. The definition of success had been shattered and remade in an instant. It wasn't about points on a scoreboard or perfect obedience. It was about an act of pure, unscripted compassion. Clara ran to Echo's side, shielding him and the boy from the chaos. She looked at her dog, who was still calmly comforting the child, and finally understood. His purpose was never to win competitions. His purpose was to mend the broken pieces. Clara ran to Echo's side, shielding him and the boy from the chaos. She looked at her dog, who was still calmly comforting the child, and finally understood. His purpose was never to win competitions. His purpose was to mend the broken pieces. And he had just shown the entire world that the deepest wounds are healed not by command, but by kindness. The fallout from the trials was immediate and seismic. The footage of Echo comforting the child went viral overnight. Ben Carter's podcast featuring his exclusive interview with Dr. Finch exploded, catapulting him back into the national spotlight. Marcus Thorne's empire crumbled under the weight of public outrage and a federal investigation into his possession and use of restricted government technology. His name, once a symbol of elite excellence, became a byword for arrogance and cruelty. In the weeks that followed, Clara's quiet cabin was besieged by the outside world. News vans camped at the end of her driveway. She received book offers, movie deals, and interview requests from every major network. But she ignored them all. The noise of the world was no longer something she feared, but it was also not something she desired. She had found her own signal in the static, and it was telling her to do something more. Her healing hadn't been about finding silence. It had been about finding a purpose within it. And she realized with a clarity that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds that her mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. With the help of Ben Carter, she funneled the flood of unexpected donations that poured in from around the world into a foundation. Dr. Finch, finally free from the guilt that had haunted him for years, joined her, offering his expertise not as a scientist, but as a penitent healer. Together on that quiet patch of land in the Blue Ridge Mountains, they established the Nightingale Initiative. Her property was no longer a fortress against the world. It became a sanctuary. The mission was simple but profound: to locate, rescue, and rehabilitate any other surviving subjects from Project Nightingale and similar programs who had slipped through the cracks. They didn't retrain them for obedience or for show. They worked to heal the dog's own trauma, helping them rediscover the quiet joy of just being a dog. Then they carefully paired them with other survivors, veterans, first responders, and trauma victims who, like Clara, needed a silent, understanding companion to help guide them home. The final scene of our story takes place 6 months later. The harsh Appalachian winter has given way to a lush spring. The cabin is the same, but the land around it is transformed. There are new, comfortable kennels, a peaceful walking trail, and a training yard designed for trust building, not competition. Clara stands on her porch, a cup of coffee steaming in her hands. Echo is by her side, his fur glowing in the morning sun, his tail giving a slow, contented thump against the wooden planks. He is no longer just her dog. He is the quiet, foundational symbol of this new beginning. A car pulls up the gravel driveway. A young woman gets out, a former Army medic. She moves with the same stiff caution that Clara once did, her eyes scanning the perimeter, seeing threats where there are only trees. Dr. Finch greets her gently and then brings out a shy black Labrador, another rescued nightingale. The dog and the woman look at each other, a silent question passing between two souls who speak the same language of pain. Clara watches a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in years. The greatest way to heal our own wounds, she knows now, is to use our scars to help heal others. The echoes on the ridge were still there, but they were no longer the ghosts of her past. They were the gentle, hopeful calls of a future she was building, one survivor at a time. She was home, and she was finally bringing the others home, too. The story of Clara and Echo is a reminder that the most profound connections are often forged in the quietest moments, and that the greatest strength can be found in the deepest wells of empathy. While their specific story is a work of fiction, the healing power of an animal's love is incredibly real. Every single day, countless rescue animals, each with their own story and their own scars, are waiting to find their person. And every day, people just like Clara are struggling with invisible wounds, searching for a reason to keep fighting. So here's my invitation to you. In the comments below, I would love for you to share a story about an animal that changed your life. How did they find you? How did they heal a part of you that you thought was broken? Let's fill this space with a testament to the incredible bond we share with them. And if this story moved you, consider looking up real-life organizations that create these life-saving connections every day. Groups like K9s for Warriors Mission Canine Rescue or even your local animal shelter are doing the vital work of pairing veterans and first responders with companion animals. A simple donation, a few hours of volunteering, or even just sharing their mission can make a world of difference. Thank you for spending this time with us. If you believe in the power of storytelling, please like this video, subscribe for more stories that matter, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a journey. Until next time, be kind.